Okay, guys, so this is the third installment of the Nationalist and Liberal Revolutions, 1830 and 1848. I left you last time, really talking about some synthesis and the influence of how Napoleon III will impact politics in Europe, creating a new age of realpolitik, but also having an impact on authoritarian regimes that will develop around the 1920s in Italy and 30s. Under Napoleon, in Germany under Adolf Hitler, and then also Russia with Stalin. So some far-reaching implications, to say the least. But as we said, when France sneezes, Europe catches a cold, and so the revolution in 1848, much like 1830, will spread. These ones will be a little bit more significant and a little bit more successful. So keep that in mind, because you are going to do an activity in class that kind of reflects your knowledge of that. So while the revolution in France in 1848 was big because they basically kicked out their constitutional monarchy, and they go to yet another republican form of government, traditionally we would have expected the concert of Europe to come in and put that down. But the problem is, there's a lot of things going on in the rest of European nations. In fact, the members of the Concert of Europe, those who are left, had to deal with a lot of their own issues. So when this breaks out, they're really helpless to help out in France, because they're dealing with things at home in their own nations. So as soon as the news of the new republic in France spread via newspaper, remember, people are becoming more and more literate and these ideas are catching fire, nearly every major city in Europe began their own revolution. And this reminds me of, kind of my childhood, and making a synthesis moment here. In 1989, I think it was in like 8th or 9th grade, but, the Berlin Wall fell, and then one by one, the communist regimes behind the Iron Curtain in the Cold War, one by one started opening up, having new elections. The governments fell. And so, it's just really kind of, I didn't realize it at the time. I really wasn't a student of European history at that point, but it's kind of neat to, when you think about things that you've lived through that actually are kind of history repeating themselves. So, again, back to 1848, these new revolutions were empowered by both liberal ideals and nationalism. And these revolutions popped up instantaneously, like in Italy, in Germany, in Austria, in Hungary, etc. And all the places either demanded nationalistic or liberal reforms. Austria in particular, you think about that map that I showed you earlier. They had so many nationalities: Hungarians, Slavs, Czechs, Italians, Serbs, Croats, and others. And interestingly enough, there were more non-Germans living in the Austrian Empire than Germans. And so people are like, well, how can this be? Why are we like prisoners of the German-speaking people? And Hungarians like Louis Kossuth, pictured here, I'll go ahead and use my my drawing tool here, of course. Right there. Pretty cool, huh? He is going to be the guy that is going to be the Hungarian force for change. Okay? And, again, the revolution broke out, and here we have live action footage. Metternich is going to flee Austria and Vienna in fear, as all governments were either removed or started to meet the demands of the revolutionaries. So in 1848, real change is a-coming. Okay? In many of these countries, nobles were removed, constitutions were drafted, liberal constitutions were drafted, and it really is a new era of change that is beginning. So in here, this is hard to read, but you have revolts and centers of revolutionary activity, and you can see it's all over. And it's really in the German areas in particular. Obviously you have Paris here, and we have some things going on in northern Italy, in Rome, and down in Sicily. So you can see at 1848, Europe is just exploding it's on fire with revolution. So in Germany, revolutionaries called for the removal of monarchs and the nobility, as well as for a union of all German people into one single massive German state. And, this is called Großdeutsch and Kleindeutsch. big Germany versus little Germany. So a lot of Germans thought, man, if Germany or I'm sorry, Prussia at this point and Austria would unite, what a force it would be for German people, and they would change the course of European history. And then there was the theory of Kleindeutsch, or Little Germany. And some people thought, well, that'll never work. We need to have a German homeland, but it's going to be either the leader of the Hohenzollerns in Prussia or the Habsburgs in Austria. And actually, Kleindeutsch is the one that will actually play out, but it won't happen until 1871. But what happens is hundreds of German leaders met in Frankfurt. This is called the Frankfurt Assembly, or the Frankfurt Parliament. Please make sure you note that. And they were voting, they were going there to kind of like basically have a constitutional convention, organize this new grand Germany. But it failed. Okay? Again, Austria, Prussia, the leaders, they couldn't agree on what exactly the plan was. Also complicating this issue was, in Austria, all the Hungarians and Slavs rebelled. They wanted reform. They wanted to reform the empire and start new nations based off of race, culture, and language. And so, unfortunately, within a month, all these revolutions are going to fail. More on that in a second. While all nationalities and classes worked together for the rebellions, they couldn't agree on how to exactly arrange the new governments. And so when they started infighting, this made it easy for the old governments, with the help of Russia. Please remember that. Russia steps in, especially in Austria, to kind of lay the smackdown and help restore order for the Habsburgs. And they were able to reconquer and control all the government by the end of 1848. So the revolution's far-reaching implications, you could make the argument that many of them failed. However, they definitely did significantly change the future course of Europe. So I'm going to give you some things here to contemplate. All right, the revolutions of 1848. It's definitely 1848 is a watershed political event. These revolutions in the 19th century, and we mean watershed. It means it's a game changer. Things aren't going to be the same. So even though the revolutions did fail, it showcased the inability of the European states to maintain the old guard, the feudal style, the repressive, conservative ways. Okay, it was also clear that nationalities were split apart or forced under the rule of a large empire, that those were no longer going to last. We will see, for example, Austria will, in fact, by 1867, they're going to modify their empire, and that's where Austria will become Austria-Hungary. Okay, people no longer identified with local rulers or religions, but now a common race, language, culture. Even if it meant standing up against repressive, forceful, conservative political powers. And then 1848 would be the last time Russia and others would work together to maintain their monarchies. So the concert of Europe by 1848 is done. It's gone. The 1848 revolutions were influenced by Romanticism, nationalism, liberalism, and socialism, as well as economic dislocation and instability. Really, it's important to note, only Britain and Russia avoided significant upheaval. Everywhere else was on fire. Neither liberals nor conservatives could really gain a permanent upper hand. So this results in the end of serfdom in Austria and Germany. It results in universal male suffrage in France. Parliaments were established in German states, although controlled by princes and aristocrats, and they stimulated unification impulse in Prussia and Italy. So 1848 will be huge in the modern formation of Italy and Prussia. And that'll be the next presentation. So again, this is also the last of the liberal revolutions dating back to the French Revolution. Okay, so again, significant, in terms of far-reaching. Yes, a lot of the revolutions failed, but Europe was never the same. So again, please, if you have any questions, email me or bring your questions to class. But that's it for the 1848 revolutions. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Hopefully all's well.